What's up, audience? How you been? Me? Good. Amazeballs, as they say in America. Ah. Have you ever wondered what's the whole deal with the yin and yang? And like what's the relationship between yin and yang? Like at the deepest level. Masculine and feminine, right? We call it masculine and feminine. But what's the relationship that they have? Which shines through everything else. And that one particular relationship is seen everywhere else. It never goes away, it's always seen. What's that relationship between yin and yang? What's up with this concept of dominant, submissive, or guiding, or leading, following? Protecting, devoting, right? What's up with that? I tell you what's up with that. Tell me what you want, what you really, really want. You know what's up with that? Is that life, which is yin, fire, has to always be at least just a little bit stronger than death. At least just a little bit. Okay? Because everything that you see in this moment, even including me, this video, is proof that life is dominant over death. However, I have to say, if death is dominant over life, then there is no show that we're seeing here. Okay? And so when the death is dominant over life, how does it manifest like in your daily life? It manifests as abyss, depression. Okay, that's when the death is dominating your life. And of course, if that happens, then the point of it all is to discover that spark, even in the darkest and in the deepest abyss. You can still discover the spark, because the reality is that even at the deepest abyss, life is still dominating, even if just by one pixel, if just by one smidgen, it's still dominating. That is enough to prove, to continue this flux that is never ending. Okay? So it's like life is creating something, right? It's creating something, and death is following it and destroying everything behind it. So it's always fresh. Okay? And so that is like the deepest state of consciousness when the yin and yang is dancing. And so that's, you may call it, that's a state of peace and bliss. That is when death is so prevalent, but not more than life. Life is just a little bit more prevalent, and that magic happens. Okay? The dynamic between masculine and feminine, and a woman and a man also is reflected by the same law. And so I want to talk about this a little bit. Given the fact that life, or yin or fire, is just necessary just a little bit over the depth or water, just a little bit over, that shows the real dynamic, how you are actually protective as a man rather than a tyrant. And also, how are you actually um, um, devoted as a woman, but not, you know, conniving and deceiving and, you know, cancerous. Okay? And so you see, both have certain responsibilities to play. Okay? Now, if you go way too much into life, too much into fire, that's hell. That's tyranny. Because it's too much of the life is trying to remain. Some of it, the past already has to kind of go away. And if you don't let that past die, you cannot be in the present where the life is still in a real time creating something. And so when all this stuff that is there in the past hasn't been burned off, that creates hell, right? So you have like way too much things, the patterns that he has not yet burned off. And so that's hell. That is life insisting too much, or masculine insisting on it too much, right? The other side, the abyss side, or the water side, or the feminine side, it becomes cancerous when it is trying to dominate over life, right? Because if death is dominating over life, everything is around you just going to be destroyed. And so that's why if you're like happen to be, you know, found yourself being conniving, deceitful, and manipulative woman, you can see very quickly how everything around you is fucking getting destroyed, because you're an incarnation of death itself. But that's not to say that some of that isn't necessary. Okay, some of them is necessary to keep the pressure for the life to keep going, right? Because life needs to always be one-upping the death. And so the death has to be there, that pressure of death and that chaos has to be there for the life to keep on pumping, you know, for the life to keep on going, not getting into the stagnation. So some of it is good, you see. And what is it? Some of it looks like. Well, if let's say a man has some sort of habits that are not serving in the best possible way, a woman may be having problems with that and testing you out. Can you be up to date? Right? Can you be always up to date? And so that is healthy when it's not overdone too much, when it has to be authentic, you know. But when it's overdone too much, it becomes problematic, because sometimes I hear women say like, well, I just need like a stronger man. That usually is not the case, because anybody stronger than the man that, for example, is reasonable and strong and does the right thing is probably going to be a tyrant. So you don't want a stronger man. You need to just check yourself and see that you are way out of your fucking line. That's what's really going on. Because anything stronger than a man who's a real deal is a tyrant. And so you're asking for the abuse. That's what you're doing. If you're not checking yourself, if you're not decreasing that chaos energy, which sees everything and it has to always shed test everything, you know, you don't need a stronger man. Well, I mean, I'm not saying in all cases, but most of the time, if a man is reasonable and, you know, and secure in himself, you don't need a stronger man. You probably have a very strong man anyway, and it's your responsibility to take it down a notch. Okay, everything has to be in a balance, and because if you go so far into this death energy, right, then you're asking for more and more strength and more force to be dominant over you, because yin is always has to be dominant over yang, just at least a little bit, for the life to continue, because I'm sure that you don't want for life to end, you know, even though it's even if it's not possible, but there might be a state of consciousness where it's so fucking depressed and so pathetic that it's you know, it's just an abyss to be in. I'm sure you don't want that, but some parts of you may bring you to that point, simply because there's no energy to check you. And so of course the feedback is that you do end up experiencing that, seeing that yes, you didn't destroy everything around you by being deceitful, conniving and manipulative, and you know, and whatever. You do end up in the situation like that, and that's what your lesson is right now. And so you pick the hard way by being a villain, going through these episodes of suffering, because you just don't yet know how life works, and you have arrogance believing that you do, you know. And sometimes people have to learn the hard way. Others, for some reason, they learn very quickly. They see what they're doing, and they see like, oh, wait a second, that's not what I want in my life. How big do you want your ego to get? That's why, like, a feminine ego is this death destructive force that makes a man to want to kill himself, you know. And the masculine side, that dominating and, you know, fire energy, wants to kill somebody. So that's why the feminine makes you want to kill yourself, and the masculine makes you want to kill somebody. This is why, like, when they both out of whack, then you get like a murder-suicide situation going on. That's just complete out of whackness, you know what I'm saying? But then again, okay, let's just look at like the healthy way. Okay, there's always going to be some variation of that energy, chaos energy, you know, the death energy is going up and down, and it's just doing that. So a man's job is to always be just a little bit stronger than that energy. Like, for example, you can have so much strength that you can crush a woman, but you use just enough where she's at. If she's vulnerable, then you bring that energy down, but just a little bit above where she is, to lead her out into life, you know, get her out of death into life, just a little bit. And if she's very fierce and trying to be dominant, you gotta be just a little bit more dominant than her. Okay? But not too much and not too little. Just, you always have to be just a smidge. That's what you can learn from the yin and yang situation. The fluxes always keep going, because the yin always, the light always wins against dark. So that's what keeps going. But it is always appears that the you know, dark may win, but it never happens. Well, I'm gonna have to cut this video short because we got the rain. It's not like I'm afraid of rain, but well, maybe it's just a little just a little bit. Anyway, actually feels pretty nice. What was I saying? Okay? And so the man's job is always to be just a smidge dominant. So like the woman is really deep into chaos energy, you go, or like, you know, the apathy, you go there and just a little bit put the spark in there. Or if she's like way too much in the spark, you gotta spark it up and bring her down a little bit. You always have to be, you know, bringing that energy back to the center. And sometimes, like for example, as a man, you may be doing that, and so that's the maximum that you can do as a man. And if a woman actively resisting that type of guidance, your guidance could be perfect, but if she's actively resisting that type of guidance, then she's doubling down on her ego and she's doubling down on death. And so that's why as a man you can't really do anything about that. She just needs to go on her own way, learn the lessons hard way, and so then she's going to be a little bit like, oh, that's how the life works. Didn't lead me to my happy life. So maybe I should find a man who's just a little bit slightly dominant over me, so I feel like a woman. Not a tyrant and not a pussy. A gentleman. So as you can see, we both have a little bit of tweaking to do. Learn something from the yin and yang. Daddy still got it, man. Yeah. I feel like, you know, pumping a little more. There's no more rain. Okay? And if you as a man, you get that thing that you always need to be, and sometimes people say you always have to maintain in the middle. That's, I found this is not to be the case. Because if you always maintain in the middle and a woman is doing all this and you stay in the middle, right? You lose her. You lose the connection. She's way over there or she's way over there. You got to maintain it, her in the middle, but you got to go where she is, bring her back. Go where she is, bring her back. To maintain her in the center. But you don't stay always in the center, because then you're just going to be, you know, you may come across as cold. That's what usually happens. Because that steadiness without that motion is coldness. And as a woman, if a man is leading you back to the center, and you can trust that man to lead you back to the center, your job is just don't resist it. That's the matter of trusting. Of course, you got to have the intuition and see if this person, if this a man, you know, is a tyrant or not. But if you clearly feel that, okay, no, this is a real deal man, you know, why shouldn't you allow him to bring you back to the center? That's his job. You know, what are you gonna lift yourself up by your ass, by your own ass. You can't do that. And so don't try to do that. Because it looks funny, you know, when you try to lift yourself up by your own ass. It just looks funny. And we all know how it comes across in real life. All these coping mechanisms and whatever, you know. It's just funny. And I'm not saying this doesn't have to be just like one particular person, even though it may be. It may happen just in life in general. It may be just like a very short-lived dynamic. You may never see that person again, but there was like a little dynamic that was harmonious. It wasn't nonsense, you know? And so you want to have these more and more of these dynamics that were right. And you know, even like the best male dancer, the best male lead dancer, wouldn't want to dance with a, you know, rigid chick. I'm just using a different term. But you know what I mean, you see? Because if you are in that category and say like all men are like that, no fucking way all men are like that. Then most of these men just don't hang out with where you are looking for them. They're just not there. Because why would they hang out with just like a bunch of tyrants or wussies who are just, you know, still don't get what the fuck is up? By the definition, they're not there. By the definition, they're not there. And that's the way you may. But anyway, when you learn how to be a woman, the right men come into your life. And when you know how to learn a man, right woman come into your life. It's just the way it is, you know. And as long as you know how to live authentic as a man and authentic as a woman, and because this is the first thing that we have to learn, everything else follows, really. Like even those sayings that, you know, by Jesus, find the kingdom of God. And these are all talking about like that primordial yin and yang dance, where the yin and yang is just a little bit over the yang. It's always doing it. The past is always dying off. The death is eating the past. And poof, the life is always sparking something new. And death is always catching up to life. But life always, like that soap in a hand, poof, always slips out. And death never catches the life. It always slips out. And if you live a life like that, really, if you learn one thing that makes everything else, this is what you may call a seed. If you learn how the seed works, you can plant them and everything else grows in the right way. But as long as you don't have the balance in the seed level, you're going to grow some sort of abomination, not a tree that gives you fruit. Oh, that's better lighting now. Let's see. We can strike that. I have to pose. There's no space. Anyway. Peace. I'll see you next one.